Welcome back. On to election matters. In just a few days, on November 26 this year, the Namibian nation will head to the polls for the regional councils and local authorities elections. To talk to us about the patterns, highlights and anticipation of the upcoming elections is political analyst Sam Kauapirura. Good morning and welcome to the program, sir.
Good morning and thanks for having me. Can you hear me properly?
We can hear you loud and clear. Welcome to Good Morning, Namibia.
Thank you so much.
Now, sir, what are you anticipating for the 2025 regional councils and local authorities elections?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. So I would expect more competitive, yet more fragmented politics in these elections slated for next Wednesday. Now, if I just contextualize it, in 2020, the ruling SWAPO party dominated councils, the regional election councils with about 88 out of 121 seats. But its popular vote fell to around 56%, and then we saw parties such as the IPC, the LBM, and the strengthened PDM taking significant chunks of the vote. And that led to opposition parties now controlling or sharing control of many key urban councils, such as Windhoek, Walvis Bay, Swakopmund, and others. Now, that was a major shift from the 2015 elections where we had absolute dominance from the ruling SWAPO party. And so if I was to mention a few dynamics which I would be watching for the 2025 elections scheduled for next week, three things to me will come to mind. The number one is the youth vote. Now we know that our latest census numbers showed us that about 71% of our population is under the age 35. That can essentially mean that this election might as well be a youth election. So it's important to understand which way and how the youth vote in this election, because they are a serious constituency. And then judging from the previous election also, there was a whole tension between the urban versus, the rural vote. We've seen the urban voters, especially in some informal settlements, driving opposition gains, while the ruling SWAPO party remains stronger in many rural constituencies. And then the third thing is the whole question of coalition governance. With more fragmented councils based on the 2020 election numbers, coalitions and local pacts, will be decisive as to who actually governs, not just who tops the poll. So I think those are the key reflections that I can just relate to this election based on what happened in 2020.
Now, Mr. Kauapirura, in terms of the Namibian legal framework, regional councils and local authority elections are conducted every 5 years. But talk to us about the previous elections and its highlight, and what changes do you want to see in this year's elections, focusing again on from a legal perspective?
Yes, so you are right. The elections are scheduled, for every 5 years. And so on. And if I can just quickly again indicate that in the past we used to have a dominant ruling SWAPO party in elections, dominating just about everything, even regional and local government elections. We've seen them retaining dominance, but also weakening significantly in some regional and local authority election outcome. So I would, so the one thing to watch to me would be, the ruling SWAPO party's trajectory. One would want to see whether, that loss which happened in 2020, with the representation dropping roughly from over 80% to just over 50%, would continue, or whether the SWAPO trajectory would then regain some lost political turf. And then in terms of what should or could change is, number one is less complacency, meaning more accountability from governing and opposition parties alike, issue-driven election outcomes. You know, local elections, regional and local elections are about specific things which affects, you know, daily citizens' lives, such as housing, water, land, jobs, and local economic development. So they are not about personality and liberation credentials. And it's important that political parties understand that when they field candidates who can actually deliver on those specific deliverables, but I also anticipate in terms of our legal framework and some of the political election outcomes that we have seen in 2020 is I would suggest that should we have outcomes that also require coalitions, that those coalitions would become more disciplined. Opposition victories in councils should translate into stable governance, not just headline grabbing, some infights and so forth. So the legal framework remains stable. Every 5 years, elections are delivered, but the content of those elections is being represented by a dynamic shift. We see the ground is shifting. We see a weakening ruling party, especially basing it on 2020, and then we see some coalitions. We see some smaller parties gaining ground. We see informal settlement dwellers voting more for oppositions. And these issues are becoming more relevant in terms of how coalitions are then governed. But we could also see a situation where the ruling party would have cleaned house and then regain some control, weakening the opposition. So I don't think some of the opposition gains that we have seen and the coalitions formed, I don't think those ones could essentially mean that they are permanent. If the ruling party cleans house and regains control, then opposition parties then weaken altogether. So it's an interesting mix of, a dominant ruling party being challenged by all our opposition parties and more voters voting for newer parties, experimenting with their votes, looking for change around housing, water, land, jobs, and then local economic development.
Definitely an interesting time ahead. Now, you spoke about the dynamic shift and how many changes we're seeing just in terms of whether it's from the political parties or really the voter behavior. But now, what do historical patterns in voter registration over the years tell us about citizen engagement?
Yes, the first thing that it tells us is that there has always been a growth in registration. Our citizenry has been registering. During the different registration windows and intervals, people go and register. Yet, while there's been an increase in registration, there's been a stagnation in actual voter turnout. And it's a worrying pattern. So it appears that Namibian citizens believe in their right to vote. They actually go out and actually register in order to maintain and protect that right, yet they don't go to the polls to actually go and express that right. And then so this pattern of registration without participation is a bit worrisome. We should be dealing with this elephant in a room. It talks to the whole question of engagement. It appears that our citizens care enough to register, but they are not convinced that local and regional councils change their daily realities. So there's a sense of disillusionment, especially among young and urban voters who see local authorities as slow on land servicing, housing, jobs, and basic services. But at the same time, we see rising support for new parties and local movements when we look at the 2019 and the 2020 numbers, which show a form of some engaged protest, where voters seem to be experimenting with alternatives, not necessarily withdrawing from the elections as such.
Now, lastly, as we wrap up, we're running out of time now, sir. What might be the implications of having a low turnout, really, in under a minute? Can you just wrap that up for us and tell us the implications of not coming out to vote and also placing emphasis on the importance of casting that vote?
Obviously, the first challenge for a low turnout would be a legitimacy gap. If only 4 in 10 registered voters vote, it would suggest a lack of strong social mandate. Number 2, it could also lead to policy distortion when only a narrow, older, or more organized slice of the electorate actually vote and not the broader community, it then leads to some policy distortions. And then it could also create a space for some the elites to capture some councils for narrow political and personal gain. When the citizens are disengaged, it is easier for party elites, interest groups, or business networks to influence local councils for personal gain. But it also fuels, cynicism and protest politics. If voters don't see improvement after voting once, they may stop voting and turn to the streets and social media activism or disengagement. That would not just erode trust in, for example, local councils. It would also dent the democratic identity of our politics as a whole.
Thank you so much, sir.